How did Donald Trump pull off his comeback in the 2024 election? In today's video, let's break this down. Let's start off with money. Consider the price of everything these days: groceries, gas, rent. Despite the economy being technically in good shape, many people were struggling with basic expenses. This dissatisfaction is what Trump tapped into when he talked up his economic record, which included lower prices when he was in office, and the promise to bring back policies like tax cuts and less regulation. Essentials like groceries would be affordable again, he promised. Now here's a question for you. What does this mean for your daily life? This promise is powerful for many Americans who barely made ends meet. This is what Trump knew and tapped into, adding strength to his position by promising to take away the financial burdens of the Americans. There is also the immigration factor. This was a big issue for a lot of the American voters, that immigration of people was essentially taking the jobs and the economy away from them, whether you agree with it or not. Trump's agenda pledged mass deportations and increased border security. His narrative here was straightforward. They can control the border and protect American jobs. The message especially resonated in economically vulnerable communities. What do you think? Would tighter immigration control really help the job market? And it clearly influenced votes, or at least the votes of Trump supporters. Another big factor? How Trump was able to leverage the power of social media and influencers to win over young male voters. Building Trump's momentum was instrumental endorsements from people like Joe Rogan and Jake Paul, who are popular with the young crowds. They connected with audiences in ways that traditional politicians can't. Social media was a powerful way to reach new demographics, and Trump knew this. He saw the highest Republican support from the younger voters since 2008. Kamala Harris, for example, didn't seem to make a connection with these voters. But she focused on things like abortion rights, which appealed to young women but didn't resonate as deeply with young men who worried more about the economy and immigration. So Trump's victory wasn't a fluke. It was a carefully orchestrated comeback with an emphasis on the 3 I's: inflation, immigration, and influencers. He found out what people cared most about and communicated it via trusted channels. Clearly, Trump's victory in 2024 is historical. Think about it. Trump went from being a divisive figure to being scrutinized for challenging the 2020 election's legitimacy to winning the highest office again. Few politicians, if any, have done this. Let's talk in more detail about his win. Although Trump will doubtless claim it was a landslide victory, his win wasn't a landslide victory. He's won around 74.5 million votes, and there are still a lot of votes to count in states like California and Washington. That means the final numbers aren't final yet, but it's unlikely he'll draw as many voters as his opponent or reach the turnout levels of previous elections by a big percentage. It's nothing like Reagan's 1984 victory, where he took 58% of the popular vote and an unbelievable 525 electoral votes. That sort of landslide is the stuff political history is written about. Solid, but not among the highest presidential victories. Trump's tally of 312 votes in the Electoral College will stand for the Electoral College. Obama secured his re-elections with broader public support, winning 365 electoral votes in 2008 and 332 in 2012. For the time, George W. Bush even won 286 votes in 2004, a smaller number, but still enough to win. But Trump's 2024 numbers outpaced his 2016 306 and Biden's 2020 306, offering Trump a stronger win this time and a mandate. The 2024 election is one of the most notable shifts to the right we've seen in many parts of the country. Trump was able to win more of the vote in counties across the U.S., largely in places that had historically been swing districts. What's fueling this? Among other issues, working and middle-class voters are increasingly discontent with inflation, soaring housing costs, and worries about crime and immigration policies, many analysts say. Effectively, Trump tapped into these issues when he promised economic relief and tighter immigration controls, which gave voters already feeling the squeeze of rising living costs and uncertainty in their communities something to rally around. Another trend we are seeing is a break from the old voting habits of people voting for a ticket between parties. It was nothing out of the ordinary in the 60s and 70s for voters to elect a Republican president and a Democratic majority in the House. This is what Nixon and Reagan saw in their landslide victories. Voters gave them almost every state and chose Democrats for the House so that both got a balance. Since then, however, voters have tended to vote in much more predictable partisan lines for the House, Senate, and White House, which leads to far greater swings in power between the two parties and shorter times with unified government. Trump's win is the third straight time that voters have changed the party in power in the White House, something not seen since the 1800s. This was the last time this happened, with Grover Cleveland's non-consecutive terms when voters kept flipping the party in control. This is a historical pattern broken and speaks to the prevailing political climate we live in. For now, Trump has the upper hand, but he has a new problem just 2 years away. His popularity and ability to keep the Republican majorities he may win in Congress will be tested early. In midterm elections in 2026, maintaining control won't be easy if history is any indicator. Past 3 presidents, including Trump in his first term, have lost control of the House after 2 years. He'll have to keep his appeal and actually deliver promises to his base if he wants to break this pattern. The opposition could quickly regain ground if he falters, and his influence may be tested. However, it cannot be understated how Trump's second-term victory is significant, not just because it's rare to see a former president return to office, but because of what it suggests about today's political environment. All of this points to a changing political landscape and Trump's ability to appeal to a discontented electorate, his successful messaging on immigration and the economy moving the voting habits. The triumph of his win shows that party loyalty and voter alignment are steadily hardening. Each election is a fight for total control rather than a compromise between parties. Let's talk about why Trump won. We can all agree it was more than just a political comeback. His win was a seismic shift in the American political landscape, and here's how he did it. Americans have been frustrated with the state of the economy for a while. Unemployment was low, wages had gone up, but inflation was bothering voters. People's minds were still weighed down by rising costs of living, especially in housing and essentials. Even though the economy did see some improvements, the day-to-day financial strain combined with high interest rates made voters increasingly critical of the Biden administration and more apt to give Trump's policies another try. This landscape helped Trump push his message effectively. He promised to return the economy to a stronger footing, tapping into nostalgia for pre-pandemic economic stability. White voters made up a larger share of the electorate for the first time in decades, rising from 67% to 71%. However, this trend was good for Trump because white voters typically vote Republican. And this increase in white voter turnout was a surprise and a plus for Trump as America's demographic shifts continue, with Latino and Asian American populations growing. Trump's demographic gains didn't end there. In winning 46% of Latino voters, he was able to grow his support among Latino men, a record high for a Republican candidate. Whereas Latino women overwhelmingly chose Vice President Harris, but this gender gap helped Trump win, with more Latino men than in previous elections backing him. Younger male voters also went for him, a trend that cut across racial and ethnic lines to bolster his coalition of support. More women turned out to vote in 2024 than in 2020, but women made up just 53% of voters, and Harris failed to win as many female votes as Biden. Harris received support from college-educated women. Trump widened his lead among non-college-educated women, who made up a big chunk of the electorate. Trump's appeal in the U.S. to working-class voters, at a time when the party of the left was seen as catering to elites and urban professionals, also highlighted the stark gender and education divide here. Trump was able to take advantage of voters' concerns about immigration, crime, and foreign policy, and win their confidence, especially in people who didn't like the Biden administration's response. Harris led on favorability on issues such as abortion rights, even on an issue where Trump was able to close the gap dramatically compared with the pre-election polls. The shift of focus from Harris's strengths to Trump's solidified support among a number of demographics, due to people's trust in Trump on these core issues. This election, Harris had obstacles. She became a person locked to Biden's administration and policies, making it difficult to stand out. Her sincerity also became a gendered issue. Polls showed that while most women believed her moderate proposals, most men thought she was pandering for votes. It is also a reflection of the continuing question of whether America is ready for a woman president, particularly in an environment where gender expectations remain, for the most part, traditional. There was some ticket splitting in the 2024 election, with Democratic Senate candidates beating Harris in key swing states. But it didn't quite make up for the wave of support for Trump at the top of the ticket. Some Democrats might win a few Senate seats because some voters still favor Democrats locally, but the ticket-splitting dynamic suggests that voters put their faith in Trump for president as they found him right on issues like the economy and immigration. Harris was seen as the slight favorite by polls before the election. But as in previous elections, Trump exceeded these expectations, especially in swing states. The polling discrepancy has again become a familiar trend. Late deciders and those who are breaking for Trump in the final days of the election are again tipping scales in his favor. Some dynamics may have been accurately predicted by polls, such as gender divide, but polls didn't forecast the late Trump push. A glaring drop in Democratic turnout, particularly in traditionally blue states, was one of the most important factors in Trump's win. In 2020, Harris seems to have received far fewer votes than Biden by millions, with an enormous drop in voter turnout in key Democratic strongholds like New York, New Jersey, and Massachusetts. They call it this Democratic cliff, an indication that many of the Biden voters who stayed home or switched allegiances came in Trump's favor. Kamala's loss has put the Democratic Party at a crossroads. The party is in an identity crisis, unable to hold on to working-class voters, once a Democratic stronghold. Trump's victory underscored a growing divide between financially well-off, college-educated Democrats who are a big part of the Democratic base and large segments of the working and middle class. If Democrats can't re-establish relationships with this demographic, the party risks becoming a mostly urban elites party, a path likely to make it less attractive in future elections. Therefore, 2024 will be a new chapter of American politics and Trump's victory. A shifting voter base, his coalition of working-class voters, men across age groups, and historically high percentage of Latino support reflects a new electorate. If these shifts continue, Democrats will need to adapt to them if they are to win back the typical Democratic base, because this coalition could define the Republican Party's path for a long time. This election was ultimately a political earthquake that showed the power of the right candidate in the right environment. For Trump, this will be a victory with voters who feel left behind economically and socially, and both parties will have to contend with the change when they plot the future. Why did Kamala Harris lose? This election was also about the changing gender and demographic dynamics that caught the Democratic campaign flat-footed. Women historically have been a Democratic voting bloc, but in 2024, a stark gender gap opened up. Younger men, especially those who had previously voted for Democratic candidates, went for Trump. It was a larger frustration with Democratic messaging that some men felt wasn't addressing their concerns. But Harris's team missed opportunities to reach out to these voters and instead focused on traditional progressive messaging, angering some male voters who considered alternatives. Harris's campaign even considered reaching out through male-focused media channels like Joe Rogan's podcast, but they ultimately decided that it was not worth the risk. A decision some analysts now believe was a lost chance to close the gap. Meanwhile, Donald Trump's campaign, run by seasoned strategists and having his sons and even his youngest son, Barron, on the payroll, was a disciplined front. Trump is back on the campaign trail, and with a clear plan to expand his base after years of high-profile controversy and multiple indictments. He saw Robert F. Kennedy Jr. lined up to endorse him, and he corralled the support of important media outlets that appealed to young men and a multiracial working-class coalition. Trump's team gambled wisely and won, whereas Harris has been careful. His surprising popularity on Barstool Sports and the Joe Rogan Experience made him known as a populist hero who was willing to take on the establishment. In other words, Trump's 2024 victory wasn't merely a return to the White House. It remade the politics, and perhaps the electorate, for years to come. His message of such an unconventional nature on inflation, immigration, and outreach via unconventional channels resonated with a wide swath of American voters and proved his influence is far from over. For Democrats, this outcome poses a serious question. How will they reconnect with voters who feel left behind? The story of Trump's second-term victory is only the beginning of a new American political era in which both parties will have to live with this new reality. What do you think? Let us know in the comments. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to our channel for more updates.